the best lending and borrowing markets. And then from there, we can kind of work on building up real world institutions that manage fuse pools. So that would look like you have some institution that custodies, like manages the financials of like um, getting the ability to repossess your house, and then putting a little house token as collateral on a fuse pool for you. And once that's in your wallet, you can kind of go borrow against it in a pool that anyone is free to lend to and earn that yield. Um, so we're halfway through that vision, which is we're working on building the best lending and borrowing infrastructure in a permissionless way. So the current Fuse version is honestly like a very hacky way to go about doing it. Like it's a fork of Compound, and we just have a kind of contract deploy the little fork instances, and we have a little UI for it. But the kind of long term vision with that is to make it a lot more robust. So we have a kind of Fuse 1.5 in the works, that Jet's leading, which is kind of a rewrite of the Compound code base in a way that's more favorable to um, this kind of permissionless deployment and all the new features we've added to it. And then long term, we're working on kind of a Fuse V2 that's going to have support for like fixed rate loans and rolling them over, and a lot more capital efficiency stuff. So yeah, that's kind of our two-part vision with Fuse, is really just to unlock liquidity in everything. And that comes from building the best permissionless lending and borrowing experience at the start.
Small tangent here. Did you already write detailed plans to onboard real world collateral, so houses, cars, and so on?
Oh, sorry, my phone's glitching out. No, we're not at that stage yet. I mean, it was something that was honestly a bit overhyped at our launch. I remember people coming to like our little launch event being like, "Okay, sick! Like they're gonna onboard my motorcycle. Like, where's the page to like put it as collateral?" And there's not. That's kind of, it goes back to what I said about the kind of almost two-part roadmap, which is like we're focusing on the infrastructure first because like RWA is a huge undertaking, and it's not something we can scale alongside while we're scaling our technicals. At least we don't feel so.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. I think you know, version 2 is going to be something a lot of people are looking forward to. Um, but yeah, I kind of want to talk about Nova now. So just for the people in the space who may not know what Nova is, would you like to give a little introduction to the layer 2 protocol you're working on?
Yeah. So
Thank you.
Nova was this. Oh, sorry. Nova was this kind of design I came up with over the summer while I was fiddling around with optimistic fast withdrawals. So there's this kind of problem that most people know about, which is like on optimistic rollups like Optimism and Arbitrum, you can bring your assets up in a matter of minutes, but you can't bring them back down if you want to withdraw them to L1, uh, unless you wait 7 days. In most cases, there are kind of workarounds now, but the problem with this is it doesn't only suck for users, but it sucks for developers who want to build apps that talk to other L1 apps. So an example of this is like if you want to have a DEX that can share like use L1 liquidity to make a trade for you. If you have to withdraw your assets for 7 days or wait 7 days for a message to go down, which is kind of the way it started out, then that's pretty unworkable. And then there's other cases like lending and borrowing on L1 Aave, buying L1 NFTs. These are all things people want to be able to do in their apps without waiting 7 days. And they're all actually possible because the need for the full 7 day delay is only in the case where L1 really needs to be aware of the state of L2. Like if you're withdrawing your tokens, L1 needs to know, okay, t11s burned 10 DAI on L2. Now I can mint him the tokens on L1. But there are ways you can kind of get around this if you use this relayer system, which is where instead of saying, oh, I'm gonna burn 10 DAI on the network and the network's gonna give me 10 DAI back on L1, I can lock up 10 DAI in a contract and say, if anyone gives 10 DAI on this L1 contract and I can claim it, then they'll have the right to unlock this DAI on the L2 contract. And that's been used to do fast withdrawals in the past, but with Nova, it's kind of turned into a general infrastructure that you can use to do any kind of conditional logic where you can say, I'm going to put my tokens or do something on L2. And if someone does another action on L1, they can unlock those tokens on L2. And that process can all happen in a matter of minutes instead of a matter of days. So some of the things you can kind of build on this are like cross-layer Uniswap trades. Like if I have DAI on L2 and I want to buy, or Rai, and I want to buy, RGT on Uniswap, but there's no RGT liquidity on Optimism yet. You can kind of route that trade through Nova, and that can be performed on L1, and the results get sent up to L2 for you without you having to do anything to your funds and wait 7 days.
Thank you for that example. Just to rein it in a little, are you thinking of any particular use cases? I saw some ideas in the white paper, but I think it would be good for people in here to know.
Yeah, so the kind of primary reason we built this, besides just me having fun ideas and trying to get them funded, was we want our yield aggregator to be able to interop with L1 and kind of get the best opportunities no matter which layer we're on, because we plan to be multi-rollup. And
Right.
Nova allows us to do that in a trustless way. So we can say, okay, the strategies on L2 are earning us 5% lending out DAI, but there's actually the strategy on L1 that could be earning us 10%. And we can read the interest rate from L2, and we could deposit into that new yield source that's on L1 from L2 using Nova. And that kind of opens up a whole lot of crazy stuff for our yield aggregator, where people like get super cheap deposits, but they can be earning the yield that is expensive on L1 basically. So it's kind of creates the best of all worlds.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. I find it really interesting that you mentioned that you were thinking to expand on different chains. Would you like to add to that, or is it secret?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about this last night, but basically our kind of full multi-chain strategy is still kind of an answer in progress, because it's like a tough question of whether we want to be fragmenting our identity across all these chains. But at least for L2s, I think we're pretty dead set on deploying on all of them. It's taken us a lot longer than we would have liked to deploy on Arbitrum, because like honestly, we just have so much going on that it just it was hard to make it a priority. But we're in the process of doing that right now, and I think we plan to be on all the major rollups that are EVM compatible, definitely in the near term future, because I think the interop is good enough to the point where we don't have to worry too much about fragmenting liquidity, and Ethereum enthusiasm is there, so it doesn't feel like we're in a different community.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, just to wrap up the Nova section, would you like to explain Nova to people who may not actually understand all the technicals? Explain like I'm 5.
Sure. Okay, so I'll give the simple example of, say you want to deposit into a Yearn vault on layer 1 from layer 2 with DAI. If I have 10 DAI on layer 2, I can lock up this contract, this DAI in a Nova contract called the registry. So the 10 DAI gets locked up in there, and then you will kind of attach a note when you're locking it up, and you say, these can only be unlocked if someone on L1 calls the Yearn Vault deposit function and it succeeds with the number 10. So that's basically saying, if someone deposits 10 DAI into the Yearn Vault on L1 and sends the tokens to me back up on L2 using the bridge, then it will unlock this 10 DAI. And then someone on L1, this could be an actual person or it can be a relayer bot, brings their own 10 DAI on L1. They call that exact function through a Nova contract called the Nova Execution Manager, which oversees ensuring that function is called properly. And then it sends up a message to L2 that says, hey, someone just did this action, which was in this case depositing 10 DAI into the urine vault. Is there any kind of open task bounties that match this data? And in this case, there is. It's the task we just created, which was I will give 10 DAI to anyone that deposits 10 DAI on L1 for me. And then once that message arrives, the person who kind of relayed that request on L1 gets paid out the proper amount of 10 DAI, and then the person gets their urine DAI later through the bridge.
Okay, yeah, makes complete sense. Thank you for explaining. I've just welcomed Darnell on here as speaker. Darnell, if you'd like to speak.
I was wondering if there's going to be any exchange listings anytime soon.
we don't pursue those as a team.
Okay.
Also, just so the rest of the audience know, we're accepting questions and just speakers in general. So if you'd like to speak, definitely request a mic. But yeah, I think it's time we move on to the optimization of smart contracts regarding Nova. So T11, for any devs who may be listening in here, what would be your top 3 tips and tricks that you're willing to share for smart contract optimization?
Yeah, so I mean, I get you get fun likes on Twitter when you like find out how to save 3 gas, this like funny bit shift, but ultimately the number one is just architecting your contracts in a smart way. Like avoiding unnecessary extra transactions and steps, and laying out your storage in a way that can pack into clean 32 byte slots is like really going to get you 99% of the way there. The kind of fun flashy Twitter tricks are just the like OCD cherry on top. So yeah, I think designing your contracts in a way that is efficient, and part of that comes down to like choosing the right libraries. So some of the Open Zeppelin libraries are a bit larger than some things you can find on the market. And then also kind of avoiding proxies when you don't need them, because you're going to be doing an extra delegate call. All the stuff like that starts to add up. So kind of choosing the right initial structure is my number one tip. For the second two, there's a fun one where right now the Solidity optimizer doesn't handle optimizing division by 2 into a shift right by 1, which is like significantly cheaper, and it avoids the division by 0 check. So if you're ever dividing something by 2 in Solidity, you can do caret right 1 instead and get the exact same effect, but at cheaper gas. And then my last one would probably be, a lot of people don't know that you can use the opcode ext code size, which is used to check if something is a contract usually. A lot of people end up using like a library to do it, which adds function call overhead, but you can just as easily use in Solidity 0.8.1 and beyond. You can use address, the address, and then .code.length to achieve the kind of exact same effect inline, and you can avoid that kind of library overhead.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that info. I'm also thinking, where can people actually learn more about this besides your Twitter? Like, are there people you'd suggest to follow, or blogs, books, anything that you think would help?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, since like this is such an emerging space, it's like there's the book I kind of quote unquote used to learn Solidity was like very outdated even by the time I got it, and it's supposed to be pretty modern. Like they're still talking about ICOs, and this was like in 2020. But at least for learning optimization and like designing really great smart contracts, I think the best way to learn is just to read other people's code, and those people should be people you respect. So I love the Uniswap code. I love the Element Finance code. I think the Yield Protocol code is great. I think the Rari code is great. I think even the original multi-collateral DAI code is great, even though it's a bit hard to read. Just basically going through the DeFi Llama kind of top 10 Ethereum protocols list and just reading all their code. It doesn't have to be a deep read, but kind of a skim of how things are laid out will teach you a lot. And when you go back to kind of implement your own systems, you can kind of reference some of their patterns, and that should get you going along the way. I think in terms of finding like the lower level optimizations, I come across them a lot in other people's code bases. That's how I kind of get the hint on them. And then also, if you get a really good auditor, they'll sometimes suggest fun stuff to you like that. But I think the other part is just kind of being curious. And when you come across like a weird snippet in a code base, like some inline assembly that is doing a bunch of bit shifting logic, and you're like, why is this in assembly? But then you just like copy paste it. I think like seizing those moments to be like, okay, let's actually try a bit of assembly and like see how I can apply this to my own code and what is this doing here is like gonna just keep pushing you lower and lower down the rabbit hole. And then like someday you'll be writing Yule with your eyes closed, like, oh whoa, I didn't. When did this happen?
Yeah, it's a trying it out to learn kind of deal, isn't it? Especially in such an emerging market, like you said, there's not much documentation. I feel like a lot of people do rely on Twitter though, because a lot of information is shared here, but at the same time, it's like you have to know, you have to trust the person you're getting the information from. So I think, we're very grateful to have you here, to be able to
Well,
share this
Twitter
information.
Twitter is really sorry. That's something I should have mentioned. Twitter is like a huge resource, and I'm lucky
Yeah.
that I don't know why people follow me because I just tweet like random stuff like this, but it's been a huge resource to me about whenever I'm going into some really crazy code and like I don't have contact with the author, and I'm like, what is this doing, and why is it doing it? Like I can tweet it out and get a response from like the Solidity compiler dev team explaining it, and that's just been a huge resource. And I think even if you don't get a response from like some like crazy people, but there's still a lot of other great devs who kind of peruse Solidity dev Twitter who are always kind of looking for an opportunity to show off their knowledge. So kind of nerd sniping other people with good questions, I think actually has really great results in the like super small Solidity community.
Yeah, that's really great.
One quick tangent, another one. You mentioned the maker code and the Rari code. I'm curious if you have any like recommendations to improve any of the smart contracts in there, because in general, I think maker and us, we try to optimize for security, not really for gas.
Yeah, I think the like MCD wards pattern where kind of all the contracts, they don't really talk to each like the contracts never really reach out to each other, right? Like they kind of sync their state with functions like heal. um I think it's a really interesting pattern, and it actually kind of, I think, considering Maker and Rise position, I don't think they're actually in a place where they should be hyper optimizing stuff, because most users are not opening vaults with ETH as collateral. They're buying Rye on an exchange or whatever. So I actually think designing the system for security and like form verification and flexibility is like a good choice. And I have a ton of respect for MCD and GEB for those reasons.
Makes sense, although it still stings when someone comes and asks, but why does it take $1,000 to mint one Rye? And I'm like, well, it happens.
Yeah, and the debt ceiling on, or not the debt ceiling, the kind of dust on the maker vaults, I think is like 30,000 in some vaults, which is like you have to take a loan of more than $30,000 to even be eligible to open one, which is a bit crazy. But I think, as we move to L2s, it's gonna get not as bad, and the kind of decision between like making one big, hard to understand and upgrade protocol for everything is gonna become like not the default.
Makes sense.
Again, I'd like to invite anyone who has questions or who'd like to be part of the conversation to come up. But yeah, I'm coming at the end of my script now, t11s. So if there's anything you'd like to mention in particular, we'd love to hear it. Don't feel pressured.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can just touch briefly on the Fei-Rari merger that's like kind of under the last vote right now. I think the vote closes in like an hour and 30 minutes or something, which is really exciting on the Rari end. The one on Fei's end already finalized, and it was a yes vote. So I think a kind of general summary about that might be fun, and maybe Stefan can grill me about it a bit. I remember there was a bit of tension in the Ride Discord when I think the announcement first came out. The kind of basic idea behind it is the Fei and Rari teams are going to join under one token, because we believe in kind of a shared vision and think we can support each other best, like closely collaborating. Fei will continue to operate their stablecoin, and Rari will continue to operate Fuse and Vaults. But the idea is that we're going to be slowly coming closer and closer together to build kind of more shared products, and the kind of Fei-Rari relationship is going to go stronger with more Fei distributed throughout Rari kind of protocols as the kind of core stablecoin of the system, but not necessarily one that has any priority over others.
We actually have a speaker here. Hi, SHD.
Hi.
Would you like to ask anything or say anything? Okay. Love that.
Yeah, I guess a comment on the merger. It's important to focus on the long run. I know many people weren't that happy with the terms. I mentioned in our Discord that I believe in what you guys build. I'm an RGT holder. And I tend to be focused on the long run for every project that I'm part of. So I just think there was some tension with many people on like how will this be done and what are the terms, and we don't really like the terms, but why is this like this and that like that. I think it's just important to focus on the long run, and you guys are doing an amazing job, so just keep at it.
Yeah, the kind of tension between like short-term investors and long-term investors was like very apparent when the proposal first came out. And I think we did our best to mitigate, or GFX really came up with most of this, but they did their kind of best to mitigate it with I mean, one interesting observation is that a lot of the tribe community right now is that they see themselves more as value investors, like not seeing tribe as a growth asset that represents kind of a claim on phase success in general, but as like a claim on the underlying PCV of the protocol, which is like a significant amount. And I think at the time, or maybe still now, the tribe token, like if all the tribe holders were to liquidate the DAO, they would actually be able to get kind of more assets, more ETH out than the value of their tribe. So all these kind of tribe holders came in and they were like, what do you mean you want to dilute me more? Like my whole thing is that my token is objectively undervalued. And that would really upset them because like the idea of a partnership doesn't make, they don't see it as positive growth for their asset, because the only way to grow their asset is to grow the amount of ETH backed by that backs each one in their mind. So we kind of GFX tried to kind of solve that by introducing this kind of rage quit feature, which allows tribe holders who are no longer interested in staying a part of the DAO to basically claim at that ETH ratio that they thought they would always be able to claim, just to kind of align both of the token holders so we don't kind of see resentment between the two. It's a pretty crazy plan, but it seems like people overall really support the vision, or they're at least starting to. In terms of pricing, it's really hard to make everyone happy, because like you raise the RGT thing, RGT holders think they're getting a fair price, but then tribe holders are like, oh my god, we're getting ripped off so bad. And some of them, especially since so much of the tribe community again believes in that kind of like value investor thesis of having ETH backing their own tokens, basically. That like they see Rari's token as overvalued because Rari doesn't have ETH backing each RGT. So when you kind of raise that exchange rate, they're just like, oh my god, this is so ridiculous, beyond the kind of already ridiculous price. We kind of wanted to solve that by the protocols being completely kind of eyes closed about that and having an independent firm like GFX handle the pricing. But GFX ended up asking for a pretty ridiculous gratuity to kind of do that. So the community's kind of agreed to just drop GFX and use their proposal as is, which did create some tension. And there was some talks about trying to change the pricing structure on the RGT side, but there was never quorum with the tribe holders on that. So the proposal ended up going through as is. And I ultimately agree with you that long term, like these are all rounding errors on the amount of value and innovation the kind of combined tribe is going to create.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, well, to wrap up, I'd actually like to ask, on the behalf of the community, are there any projects in the DeFi space right now that you've got your eyes on in particular? I know you're extremely busy, but if it so happens that something's caught your eye, would love to hear it.
That's a great question. I think Yield Protocol is doing some really great things with their fixed rate lending, and I think their code is fantastic. So, I'm a big Alberto fan. He's the kind of lead developer over there. I think Yield Protocol is great. They're doing great things with fixed rate lending. Um, I think Sushi Trident is really exciting. I think more competition in the concentrated liquidity space is going to be awesome. Like Uniswap V3 is so underappreciated for what is done on chain liquidity. And I obviously love Ross Campbell, who's kind of one of the lead developers of that project. Sense Finance is probably my last one. I think they're building some really cool stuff with claim and yield tokens, and they're doing a lot of it on top of Fuse in a kind of permissionless way. They're building their own kind of balancer AMM fork, which is really exciting. And yeah, I'm just excited to see all these kind of like DeFi 2.0, I guess you could call them, projects that are coming out soon.
I think it's almost DeFi 3.0 now, no?
Yeah, Sense is DeFi 3.0. Yield Protocol is like DeFi 0.0. I feel like they've been around for, or at least the design from like Dan Robinson has been around for a long time.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing. Stefan, I don't know if you have any more questions.
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, we don't have any requests, but I just want to thank you for coming on, T11. Thank you so much for sharing all this great stuff. And yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for attending as well. Thank you guys. Love the community as always. And yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
All right. See you guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.